Hello and welcome. This is TB Investigates Canton Cover-Up Part 464. Hank Brennan tried to taint potential jury pool, got owned by Dr. Marie Russell. It's by Aidan Kearney. It was posted 2 weeks ago. And as always, you can find the links in the description below if you would like to access this information without my commentary. The article begins. After I began covering the Karen Reed case on April 18, 2023, with Part 1 of the Canton Cover-Up series, the battle of public opinion in the case has been tremendously in Reed's favor. The movement for justice for both Reed and John O'Keefe has grown exponentially, as millions of people now know the undeniable facts which prove that O'Keefe was beaten inside Brian Albert's house and then dumped on the front lawn in order to frame Reed for murder. And pulling away from the article, as I have repeatedly said on my channel, that I have first-hand witness accounts of multiple online polls during the trial in which 80 to 90% of people watching the trial said Karen Reed is not guilty. Continuing with the article, for the first 4 to 6 months, there was virtually no opposition from the McAlbert Mafia, since the facts of the case were impossible to combat. The Commonwealth had no response other than some vague promises to, quote, wait until trial, end quote, when we would all see Brian Higgins' embarrassing text messages. Instead, they tried to silence the defense by filing a motion for a gag order, which would have prevented them from speaking with the media at all. When they lost that motion in late July of 2023 and realized they couldn't silence the Reed team, they decided that the only way to try to fight back was to, 1, make plans to frame my journalism and activism as, quote, witness intimidation, end quote, in order to discredit my reporting, silence me, and discourage people from peacefully protesting, and link me to Karen Reed in the hopes that they could jam her up on conspiracy charges. And number 2, find their own surrogates on social media who they could leak information to in an attempt to build popular support for the McAlberts and state police. And pulling away from the article, we all know number 1 is factually correct, and number 2 is factually correct. And number 2 is actually what they do with a lot of other cases. It's what the U.S. government does with a lot of high-profile issues, especially in politics. They will go to social media and they will implant trolls to spread misinformation about something. It's what people do now, guys. It's what corrupt institutions do now. They go on social media and they spread misinformation to confuse the facts of what's really the truth. The article continues. Number 1 was executed on October 11, 2023, when I was arrested. Then again, when they tried to charge dozens of other peaceful protesters. Then again, when they got a search warrant for Reed's phone to see how many times we spoke. And finally, when they tried and failed to indict Reed on conspiracy to commit witness intimidation charges on March 27, 2024. Number 2 was executed when former spokesman David Traub began sending emails to Michael Morrissey, the state police detectives framing Reed and Gretchen Valls, urging them to use disgraced former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer as a mouthpiece to leak information Two, because she has an, quote, enormous Twitter reach, end quote, and, quote, provides pushback, end quote, against Reed's defense. They were in regular communication with Coffindaffer, as well as Catherine Peter, who is being charged with felony witness intimidation in multiple counties. And I will read the attachments that Aidan provided in the article. This one looks to be an email, and it was sent Friday to September 1st, 2023, from David Traub, and it was sent to Michael Morrissey, and it was copied, Buchanan was copied, Yuri Buchanan was copied, Lynn Bayland, Margaret Kippendorf, Brian Tolley, John Fanning. So multiple members of law enforcement were copied to the email, and the subject is "just to be aware of Twitter post." The email reads, "She is a retired FBI agent with an enormous Twitter reach who has provided context/pushback to some of the more easily debunked aspects of the social media blitz." And continuing, it reads, Jennifer Coffindaffer provides her handle. Justice for John O'Keefe, report writing is one of the most difficult jobs in law enforcement. As my first boss in the FBI, Mr. Hooper, told me, quote, "If it's not on paper, it didn't happen," end quote. Hashtag Karen Reed conspiracy theorists have found two entries that are confusing. Conspiracy theorists have chosen to call the DA a liar based on the attached writings. The DA's statement was correct when he said Trooper Proctor was not at the Fairview address on January 29. He wasn't. He was on call that day and got the ticket to respond to a homicide involving a motor vehicle. In law enforcement, when you are on call and you get the call, you go. Those involved were Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, and he did not know them. Although Trooper Proctor and his boss, who he was with all day, hustled to respond, they had to rally up, find a vehicle that could tackle the blizzard conditions that existed, and by the time they arrived in Canton, the Fairview scene was clear, so Officer Proctor and his boss went to the Canton police office scene. Just pulling away from what Coffindaffer is alleging here, we all know she doesn't have her facts straight. She doesn't even know the address. She doesn't even know Brian Albert's address, the Fairview address. And she's acting as if it was innocent. Trooper Proctor was on call, but Trooper Proctor was friends with Brian Albert and Nicole Albert and the McCabe's. Trooper Michael Proctor had been to Brian Albert's house previously for house parties. He was essentially a friend of the family. Okay, guys? As a lead investigator for the Massachusetts State Police, Trooper Proctor was friends with Brian Albert, a Boston police officer. Okay? There was already a conflict of interest the moment Trooper Proctor went to 34 Fairview to do a half-assed investigation. Okay? And just this part as well, that by the time he arrived at the scene was cleared by whom? He's the lead investigator. By the Canton police. The MSP has more authority than the Canton police. You see, guys, even though Coffindaffer is so-called reporting on this, she is showing us that she's got zero inkling of discernment when it comes to the conflict of interest here. And the timeline that doesn't make sense. The scene was cleared by a police department. So the Massachusetts State Police, who have more authority, decided not to continue investigating the scene. It's just hogwash. It's 0 cents. Okay. Continuing. Okay, where was I? Okay, Trooper Proctor took custody of Officer O'Keefe's cell phone, which had been retrieved from under Officer O'Keefe's body by a Canton police officer at the Canton PD scene. Okay, no issue with this. The Canton PD officer is in the chain, usual as an initial responding officer. Now, in the inter-office correspondence below, in parentheses, not an official report, the person who wrote the memo said on scene, not specifying the, quote, scene, end quote, he was referring to was the Canton PD. In law enforcement, we use on scene to refer to the different scenes of response. The Canton PD was the scene Trooper Proctor and his boss responded to. Should it have been worded? I'm going to go to the next page. So that's where that document ends. So the next page is yet another email, or it's the same email that Aidan provided in the article. I wish we had the full document though, because again, there's a lot of bullshit she wrote in that document. Continuing with the attachments Aidan provided in the article, it reads from Mattel voicemail, Thursday, September 7, 2023, to David Traub, subject Mattel, voice message from J.E. Coffindaffer. You have received a voicemail message from Coffindaffer. Message length is 18 seconds. And then the next attachment is from David Traub, Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023, 11:48 a.m. to Gretchen Voss. The subject line reads, regarding Nightline ABC News request for Assistant District Attorney Adam C. Lally. The party we discussed, Jennifer Coffindaffer. So it looks like David Traub sent Gretchen Voss Coffindaffer's handle. Okay. And the article continues. And although the Commonwealth has been able to generate some pushback to Free Karen Read movement, they are vastly outnumbered because the facts aren't on their side. Another problem they face is the PR battle. In the PR battle is that Adam Lally wasn't very effective at moving the needle or getting the general public to buy into the Commonwealth's lies. But based on Tuesday's Daubert hearing, in which Dr. Murray Russell was questioned by Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan for several hours, it's become clear that the reason Brennan was hired wasn't to win this case in court, but rather in the court of public opinion. Hank Brennan is a defense attorney by nature, and a successful one. Defense attorneys often have to be more creative, lively, and theatrical in order to create reasonable doubt for their clients. When the cameras are on them, they have to use the media to spin the narrative in order to put reasonable doubt in the minds of the general public, which includes potential jurors. That is what you saw on display on Tuesday's Daubert hearing. Here are some of the highlights from the day. 1. Brennan claims that the Commonwealth took molds of Chloe's teeth. What he failed to point out is that there is zero evidence the dog they claim to have taken molds from is Chloe. The defense was not allowed to attend this procedure. The defense was not told where the dog is located so they can visit Chloe themselves. Brennan also forgot to mention that the Commonwealth is claiming that Chloe was rehomed again. If true, it means that she likely bit whoever the Albert family passed her on to. It's been 3 years since Chloe allegedly bit John O'Keefe, and her teeth could be radically different than they were at the time. The Commonwealth never took DNA samples from John's arm to test for dog DNA, so none of this matters. I agree. And that's a really good point from Aidan to point out Hank Brennan's role in this, that it's not necessarily to win at the retrial, it's to feed the public with misinformation. Again, it's what they do on social media. They plant trolls. They pay people to post on social media to spread misinformation about an issue, a case, or a political issue, a political movement, or an activist movement, so that when the public researches that case, they are left with multiple different versions and there's confusion. And when people don't know what to believe, they just drop out. They don't have a stance. Okay, it's the worst thing in a case like the Karen Reed case, when people spread misinformation and to try to confuse public opinion. But by now, like I've said, those watching the trial, people who really paid attention during the trial, they know, we all know, it was a cover-up. Continuing, most importantly, these moldings are not admissible in court for a number of reasons. Thus, the only reason for Brennan to mention them at all was because he was hired to wage war on the defense in the court of public opinion. He wants potential jurors to believe that Chloe is still alive and that the only one who sought the dog for inspection was the prosecution. This is something they won't hear during the actual trial. Yep, again, like I've said, it's Hank Brennan and Adam Lally and McLaughlin. They're all playing dirty for Michael Morrissey. Continuing, number 2, Brennan repeatedly stated Commonwealth theories as facts during his questioning of Dr. Russell and pulling away. Absolutely. I made that point in multiple parts of the Daubert hearing, that Hank Brennan should not have been allowed to say that Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe without, at the very least, using the word allegedly, right? But instead, Hank Brennan knew that it was going to be a national thing. It was going to be millions of people watching nationally and internationally. Millions of people were going to be watching the Daubert hearing, and he knew that, and it was his opportunity to muddy the waters, to taint the truth with misinformation, with false facts. Continuing. There were dozens of questions like this one posed to Dr. Russell. Quote, "Do you know how fast that Lexus was traveling backwards when it hit Mr. O'Keefe?" End quote. Quote, "What was his body position at the time the car allegedly collided with him?" End quote. And there was pulling away, guys. Yes, I remember those questions. And there was even a point that the defense objected, that Robert Alessi objected, and then they had a sidebar, and then Hank Brennan had to reword his question using the term allegedly. That even Judge Bev at one point during the Daubert hearing agreed with the defense, and she made Hank Brennan use the word allegedly. Continuing with the article, it's never been proven that O'Keefe was hit by a car, and multiple experts testified that he wasn't hit by a car. Therefore, it would be impossible for her to answer that question. Of course, Auntie Bev allowed questions like this to be asked over Attorney Alessi's objections. She did, but again, I remembered that point during a sidebar, and that immediately following the sidebar, Hank Brennan was forced to use the word allegedly. Continuing with number 3. Brennan asked Dr. Russell if she had reviewed the opinions of Dr. Kenneth Kinsey, who said that John's injuries didn't come from a dog. Dr. Russell had no idea who Dr. Kinsey was. He is not a medical doctor, but he did testify about ballistics at the Murdaugh trial and is frequently on TV. Brennan apparently got this information from an interview he did on Brandy Churchwell's YouTube/podcast, quote, 13th juror, end quote, when she interviewed Dr. Kinsey. What he forgot to mention was that Dr. Kinsey specifically said that he doesn't believe O'Keefe's arm injuries didn't come from being hit by a car. I wonder if it's reworded. Not reworded. If it's a typo. I'm just going to read that again. What he forgot to mention was that Dr. Kinsey specifically said that he doesn't believe O'Keefe's arm injuries didn't come from being hit by a car. I wonder if Aidan meant, it's like two negatives, right? Anyway, I will play this video.
I don't see it from the light. I'm not saying it's not possible because, maybe that's something an engineer could tell you. And in this case, they had a very well-established engineering and crash firm. And obviously they said it didn't happen that way too. So this whole prosecution had some problems. And they can't convince me if they didn't at least come up with a theory for that other than the tail lens did it. Because number one, if you look at the size of the victim's arm, that is too much area for a tail light. So where did all the other injuries, lacerations come from, abrasions come from? And that doesn't do it. The tail light thing doesn't do it for me.
So I think it's safe to say that that was a typo. So when Aidan wrote what he forgot to mention was that Dr. Kinsey specifically said that he doesn't believe O'Keefe's arm injuries. I think Aidan meant to say that Dr. Kinsey doesn't believe O'Keefe's arm injuries came from being hit by a car, as we witnessed watching the video clip. Continuing with the article, and by the way, that was a really good video clip. I'm glad that Dr. Kinsey made that stance as a doctor. And again, other doctors have made similar stances observing this case. Plenty of other lawyers who are familiar with vehicle accidents made similar statements about this case. Even Lori Reese, who works in forensics, she lives in Canada, has her own YouTube channel. I provided a commentary video about her opinions. She too doesn't believe John O'Keefe's injuries came from a vehicle impact. Continuing with the article, what's really wild is that Brennan apparently lives on social media. I spoke with Brandy Churchwell, who told me that Brennan never reached out to her and she had no idea that her interview would be cited in a Karen Reed hearing. Brennan misrepresented what Kinsey said. I'm going to go to the next page, but just pulling away, obviously, for Brennan to bring that up during the Daubert hearing and to omit the fact that Dr. Kinsey himself agrees with Dr. Russell, Hank Brennan is a jerk, just spreading lies like a troll. And I called him a troll already. Hank Brennan is a troll. He omits facts about the truth to bring his point across. He just wants to be right. He doesn't want to be correct. He just wants to be right. Continuing with the article, I'll read the sentence again. Brandy Churchwell, who told me that Brennan never reached out to her and she had no idea that her interview would be cited in a Karen Reed hearing. Brennan misrepresented what Kinsey said, assumed that a medical doctor like Marie Russell sits on YouTube consuming content so she could form her medical opinions, and spewed this misinformation at the Daubert hearing for the sole intention of making the general public, in parentheses, and potential jurors, believe that a doctor conducted a scientific study that determined that John O'Keefe wasn't bit by a dog. really good point by Aidan. Concise point there. Continuing with the article. Number 4, Brennan claims that the feds employed a deputy medical examiner named John Walsh as part of their federal investigation into the investigation of John O'Keefe's death, and that Dr. Walsh believes that John's injuries are highly unlikely to be the result of an animal attack. And I will play the next video.
Well, you discussed with the defense other information in this case, didn't you, about the accident and about people's opinions? You've discussed that as part of your opinion, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that the U.S. Attorney's Office employed a deputy medical examiner to look at these bites? And then he had commented that the wounds at 2 to 3 millimeters up to 7 centimeters were documented on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, and the injuries do not photographically appear to be nor are described as puncture bite wounds, and thus are highly unlikely to be the result of an animal bite attack. Did you get that expert opinion from the United States Attorney's Office when they investigated this case to consider as part of...
And that was a good clip. And I love when Aidan provides the clips in his articles so you don't have to go back and research it yourself. He's delivering all the information to you, so you don't have to try very hard. Anyway, continuing with the article, what Brennan intentionally chose not to mention was that the Commonwealth had this information before the first trial and chose not to use it because Dr. Walsh also opined that, quote, the absence of documented injuries to his torso, hips, and legs appear to be inconsistent with a vehicle impact, end quote. Brennan also failed to mention that Dr. Walsh was basing his opinions based entirely off of Dr. Irene Scorty Bellows. Let me go to the next page. Scorty Bellows' report, which didn't mention anything about a dog attack. Really good for Aidan to point out the inconsistencies and the outright omission of crucial information in Hank Brennan's arguments. In his questioning to Dr. Russell during the Daubert hearing, Hank Brennan, again, is a snake. Continuing with the article. Number 5. Hank Brennan asked Dr. Russell if it would have helped her reach her conclusion that a dog bit John O'Keefe if she knew that Karen Reed had told Gretchen Voss that she initially thought that maybe John had hit the back of her car or that she had run over his foot. He also asked her if she knew about the debunked, quote, I hit him lie. It is laughable that Brennan thinks that a medical doctor should base her medical conclusions off of unconfirmed, inconsistent quotes from witnesses. Brennan knows this is stupid, but was playing it up for the cameras to affect public opinion. I agree 1000%. It was a show, guys. It was a circus. And again, an attempt to obfuscate the truth, to omit factual, crucial details from the truth. Continuing with the article, quote, would it help you if she told Boston Magazine that maybe John hit the back of her car and she ran over his foot? Would that help in your differential diagnosis, end quote? Continuing, quote, it wouldn't help because those wounds were caused by a dog, end quote. Yes, Dr. Marie Russell was on it. It didn't matter how cruel Hank Brennan was toward Dr. Russell. She was on it, and she maintained a respect and graciousness toward Hank Brennan, despite he not returning the favor to her. And I will read this one and play the next video. Number 6, Hank Brennan was reprimanded at sidebar for calling the plastic shards of taillight, quote, glass. I'll play the video.
And so knowing that his height matches up with the taillight, What other evidence would you want to know before you excluded the taillight as the causes of injury? To be thorough, what else would you want to know?
Well, I see pictures of the fragments of the taillight, which I eventually did, and were there any pieces of metal that had the configuration, anything that could cause those parallel lines with the punctate injuries in between?
How about taillight fragments?
Yes.
Little pieces of glass, right? When glass shatters, it shatters randomly, doesn't it?
Well, it depends on what kind of glass. So,
I'm sorry, please.
It depends on what kind of glass.
I want you.
Well, motor vehicle glass, a lot of motor vehicle glass is tempered glass, and that shatters a certain way and creates a characteristic injuries.
Okay. Tell me about your experience in Lexus rear taillight coverings. What is the pattern injury on that?
I'm not aware of any pattern injuries.
And are you aware when the rear taillight of a Lexus breaks, the different pieces it breaks into? Is it random, or is there a standard in how it breaks?
I'm not sure, but I have an idea.
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Did you look at any photographs of the scene in the debris field showing the different size taillight fragments at the very scene where Mr. O'Keefe was found on the ground? Did you look at any of those photographs?
I attempted to, but I couldn't see much detail.
Okay,
the photographs were not good.
Okay, so you don't really have a command of what the debris field looked like relative to the taillight fragments that were on the ground that morning.
Again, I imagine various scenarios of what broken glass and taillight would look like. And again, I could not come up with any scenario that would cause those parallel marks and the pattern that we described.
Well, I don't need you to imagine a scenario. I only want to talk about one scenario. That's the scenario that led to the death of Mr. O'Keefe that morning. That's the scenario I'm asking you about. And the debris field that actually existed that morning. So what I'm asking you, when you engage in differential diagnosis and you take the position that this couldn't have happened, I need to understand what you actually know about the physical evidence that's at the scene. So that's what I'm going to ask you about, that scene. If you don't know, it's okay. But I want to ask you about that scene that morning. Do you know how many pieces of taillight were found on the ground where Mr. O'Keefe was found?
No.
Do you know the shapes and sizes of the shattered parts of the taillight that were found in that debris field where Mr. O'Keefe was found?
I've seen a picture of various pieces of taillight, yes.
And if you've seen that, you would see that there are a number of different pieces of shattered taillight, yes?
Correct.
Of different sizes.
Yeah.
Of different shapes. Different diameters, right?
Yes, they're irregular, very irregular.
Irregular.
Yeah.
Irregular. Many of them sharp.
Yes.
Perhaps almost all of them. Yes?
Possibly. Yes.
Well, you say possibly because you never actually have looked at the physical evidence. You just looked at a couple of photos.
I looked at photos, correct.
And as far as the housing for the taillight, what is that made out of?
I believe it's made out of a plastic, and there's a metal around it.
It's metal.
Yeah.
What's the shape of the metal?
Really good clip. I almost wanted to keep playing it. But yeah, it's as if Hank Brennan was trying to confuse Dr. Marie Russell, or he was trying to get her to refer to the plastic pieces as glass. He repeatedly used the word shattered as if they were glass. And notice that Hank Brennan is saying that they were found at the scene when we all know, those of us paying attention to the timeline, we all know that those pieces of taillight were not found at the scene. They weren't found at the scene when there were only 2 or 3 inches of snow when Canton PD showed up. Canton PD didn't take any photographs of the pieces of the taillight at the scene when there was just 2 or 3 inches of snow, right? They didn't do it then. They waited until after Karen Reed's SUV was at the Sally Port where video footage proves that they had the time and the opportunity to mess with the right rear taillight before they brought those broken pieces of taillight back to 34 Fairview to put the pieces on the snow after it was over 20 inches, right? Over a foot of snow. Then they find the taillight pieces, right? The pieces were not found at the scene, guys. They were planted at the scene. But again, this is yet again Hank Brennan's attempt to confuse the public, to confuse the public's opinion. Continuing with the article. And guys, the Karen Reed case is an excellent case to study for years. I've said that repeatedly. It's an excellent case to study if you want to know how deep and how far government corruption will go. Like, how low will they stoop? just investigate and study the Karen Reed case. No holds barred, guys. There are limitless ways in which government can corrupt a story and corrupt people's lives. Continuing with the article. If the Commonwealth's case is so strong, then why the need to lie? The answer is because it's laughable that polycarbonate taillight could suddenly transform into a knife after hitting a human arm and cause parallel linear lacerations. None of the taillight had any blood on it either. Good wording from Aidan. Aidan did not use the word abrasions like the Commonwealth repeatedly used, right? No abrasions, lacerations, like actual cut marks, guys. Number 7. Hank Brennan cried about Karen Reed's demeanor. Continuing, according to the McAlberts, at a sidebar, Judge Cannone told Karen Reed's attorneys to stop making faces at him while he was accosting Dr. Russell. Hank is a very soft individual who doesn't like it when women express visual frustration about being framed for murder. Number 8. Hank Brennan mocked Dr. Russell for testifying that other possibilities of John's injuries used in her differential diagnosis were, quote, in her head, end quote, and not put in her report. And I remember that from the Daubert hearing. I will play this next clip. So I attempted to play the video multiple times and I tried to skip ahead. I tried to rewind to find the spot in which Hank Brennan mocks Dr. Russell and alleges that this was all in her head. Her diagnosis is all in her head. And I couldn't find it. But I will tell you that I remember that part and I likely have a video about that part. And I probably called Hank Brennan a dick for not taking Dr. Russell's expert witness testimony for what it is, that she is an expert witness. She has testified in previous trials as a medical expert witness. She has over 30 years of experience. And for Hank Brennan to tell her that this was all in her head is disrespectful and it's a waste of her time. You know, he called upon this Daubert hearing to fly Dr. Russell unnecessarily from California to Massachusetts so that he can be a dick to her in front of the country on national streaming websites. Continuing with the article, keep in mind the Commonwealth is putting the following people on the stand. Nicole and Brian Albert, who testified that Michael Lank's report stating that Caitlin Albert left at 12:15 a.m. instead of 1:45 a.m. is just plain wrong. Michael Proctor, who wrongly wrote in his report that he towed Karen Reed's car at 5:30 p.m. And if you remember that Microdot's video from the other day, the Commonwealth was forced to change that timeline. Continuing, Officer Seraph, who didn't say anything in his report about Karen Reed saying, quote, "This is all my fault," end quote, but did testify at trial that she said that, absolutely. Pulling away, guys, multiple people at the trial suddenly remembered Karen Reed saying "I hit him," even though there were no previous statements from them documented by law enforcement stating that she said that. Not one of those people on the stand who suddenly during trial had witnessed Karen Reed say, "I hit him, I hit him." They had never told law enforcement that before the trial began. Continuing, Jennifer McCabe, who claims she told police that she heard Karen Reed say, quote, "I hit him," end quote, despite the fact that it's not listed in any reports. Exactly my point. Continuing, Michael Trotta, who testified that he told Michael Proctor that Canton DPW plowed Fairview Road, despite the fact that Proctor's report said that he told them Canton DPW didn't plow Fairview Road at all. And I said it in my last video, guys, just sloppy. Just the investigation was sloppy. The Commonwealth is sloppy for bringing this case on. A botched timeline, facts everywhere, evidence everywhere, no chain of custody. Like elementary kids would have done a better job putting a cover up together and getting their timeline right. Continuing. Brennan actually tried using Seraph's testimony to trip up Dr. Russell as well. That's a really good word, pulling away. That's exactly what Hank Brennan tried to do to Dr. Russell throughout the Daubert hearing, the unnecessary Daubert hearing. He tried to trip Dr. Russell up, and she did an amazing job not falling for it. Continuing. Turns out some morbidity, obese, lying cop who gave inconsistent testimony doesn't affect her medical diagnosis. Someone needs to tell this clown that if he's taking the position that... I'm going to go to the next page. Someone needs to tell this clown that if he's taking the position that, quote, "if it's not in the report, then it doesn't count," end quote, then his entire case will fall apart. Yes, solid point by Aidan. Yeah, like you can't really use that argument, Brennan. You can't really use it in this case, buddy. You might have been able to use it in previous cases, but if you want to lean on that, good luck. A lot of the witness statements are going to fall apart. Continuing, number 9. Hank Brennan tried to catch Dr. Russell in a, quote, "gotcha," end quote, moment by bringing up the lack of dog DNA on John's clothing, but Dr. Russell astutely pointed out that there were issues with the collection. And I'll try to play this one. Hopefully the marker is correct. But before I play it, I want to say I used that exact word in one of my videos when I provided commentary for the Daubert hearing. I said that Hank Brennan was trying to catch Dr. Russell. It was like a gotcha. Like he had multiple instances when he was trying to corner her in a gotcha moment to quiet her, to silence her, and to make her feel like she was insufficient. She's inadequate as an expert witness. So I'll play this video.
You know what wasn't found for trace evidence in that sweater? DNA of a dog.
I understand that.
You know when dogs bite, saliva, foam, sweat in their mouth, correct?
I also understand that there were issues with the collection.
Well, we're going to get to your claims and see if there's any basis for it, but that's not the question I asked you, but I will invite you to talk about that in a second. Looking forward to that. What I'm asking you, you know when dogs bite, they can froth at the mouth.
Yes.
Sweat.
The false confidence from Hank Brennan, like, and I look forward to that. I look forward to, like, I'm gonna kick your ass. I look forward to it. Like, womp womp, Hank Brennan, womp womp. The arm was not tested for anything. Remember, the arm that had the injuries was not tested for anything. Right? Come on, Hank Brennan. He should have known that coming in. But yes, Dr. Marie Russell does go into it later, and she makes it clear that there was no dog DNA found on John O'Keefe because nobody tested for it. Okay, continuing with the article. Michael Proctor could have wiped the swabs he sent to UC Davis on his ass. He is a pathological liar with no credibility. I agree. I think Michael Proctor and Hank Brennan are liars at this point. Continuing. Number 10, Hank Brennan says the punctures on John's arm are actually freckles because John was Irish. Okay, I'm going to play this clip. I will make a part 2 very soon. Thank you for watching.